I'm Margaret Hartwell, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 65, a retired hospital CFO who thought I had seen every kind of predator that walks into people's lives. Tonight, at my daughter's engagement party, I looked across a glittering penthouse room in Austin and froze. The man standing there, shaking hands and dazzling with his charm, was the same man who had nearly ruined me 7 years ago. He wasn't using the name I knew then. Now he called himself Cole Harrington. My daughter Sarah, 34. A brilliant urban design director who has built her own studio from the ground up, was beaming with pride as she introduced him. She had no idea that the man on her arm was once Mark Redding, a con artist who drained my life when I was most vulnerable. The champagne glass slipped from my fingers and shattered against the marble. And for a moment, the room went silent. Cole didn't flinch. He smiled at me the way only a seasoned liar can. And then came the twist that broke whatever air was left in my lungs. Sarah took me aside and whispered with fire in her voice, "Mom, for once, don't interfere. If you can't accept Cole, then maybe you shouldn't come to the wedding. Austin has always been a city that thrives on appearances, and Sarah has learned how to navigate that world better than anyone. At 34, she runs a respected urban design studio, celebrated for turning empty lots into green spaces that wealthy families can showcase. Her success has drawn investors, partners, and plenty of attention. That is how Cole Harrington slid into her life, presenting himself as a philanthropic advisor, a man who understood both money and legacy. To everyone else, he looked like a prize. To me, he looked like a repetition of the worst mistake of my life. I started paying attention to details no one else bothered to question. Cole's entire online history seemed to begin in 2020. As though he had been born the same year, I remembered names too quickly, repeating them back with a polished smile that felt rehearsed. During dinner at Sarah's apartment, he used a phrase that froze me inside the secret to everything. He said, "Is building trust with your ingredients." It was the same line, word for word, he once used on me before draining my savings. Sarah's best friend, Renee Porter, an attorney who has never been easily impressed, gently reminded her that financial contracts move slowly. Even when romance moves fast, Renee's words gave me a small anchor. But they only irritated Sarah. She believed my concerns came from jealousy, not experience. One Sunday evening, unable to hold back, I sat at Sarah's kitchen counter and wrote a checklist of red flags right in front of her. Sudden name changes, clean records starting midlife, relentless charm, requests for quick commitments. Sarah looked at me with hurt and fury, her hands trembling as she gathered the list and threw it into the trash. That night, she sent me a message I never thought I would read from my only daughter. She said she needed space, that I was suffocating her happiness, and that she didn't want me at her wedding dress fitting. I stood there in my own kitchen, staring at the screen, and asked myself the question I knew the audience would be asking too. Had I become the villain in my daughter's story? When Sarah pushed me out of her orbit, I knew I had no choice but to find answers on my own. That was when I called Lila Morton, a private investigator with a reputation for catching liars who hide behind clean paperwork. Within days, she confirmed what I already suspected. Every address, every business license, every tax document linked to Cole Harrington began in 2020. Before that year, there was nothing but shadows. It was as if the man Sarah was planning to marry had been created out of thin air. Agent Aaron Blake of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had been tracking similar patterns across state lines. He explained that Cole followed a script. He would push for quick engagements, persuade women into joint accounts, and encourage them to sign power of attorney documents under the guise of protecting their future. Then, before the honeymoon was even over, the money and the man would vanish. Hearing it said out loud made my stomach twist. It was the same game I had seen before. Only now, Sarah was the target. I needed to test him myself, to see if he would betray his mask when he thought he had me fooled. So I called Cole and asked to meet him for lunch, pretending I wanted to clear the air after the tension with Sarah. He arrived confident, greeting me like an old friend. With that same smile that once blinded me, I played the role of the contrite mother, telling him I simply wanted my daughter's happiness. He nodded with practiced sympathy. Speaking of redemption and second chances as though rehearsed, then I slid a thin folder across the table. Inside was a draft of a fair marital agreement, prepared by Renee Porter, spelling out separate property protections and a requirement for independent audits after marriage. A man with nothing to hide would have signed it immediately. Cole only laughed softly, taking a photo of the document with his phone before handing it back untouched. He claimed it was unnecessary, that love needed no paperwork. But the way he shielded his screen told me the truth. He was not laughing at the contract. He was sending it to someone else. And in that moment, I realized I had his first crack. Not long after that tense lunch, Sarah called me with a voice that no longer sounded like my daughter's. She said Cole had been hurt by my interrogation, that he believed I was trying to sabotage their happiness. Then came the suggestion that landed like a knife. Cole thought it might be best if Sarah took some space from me until after the wedding. The words were delivered as if they were hers. But I knew exactly whose idea they were. I understood what was happening. Isolation. The same tactic he used years ago. Now refined. He was trying to cut me away so that Sarah would depend on him alone. Instead of fighting head-on, I decided to play the part of a defeated mother. That evening, I sent an email to Sarah, to Cole, and to Renee. I apologized for my behavior, admitted I had been too protective, and wrote that maybe it was time I stopped interfering. On the surface, it was an act of surrender. In reality, it was bait. Lila Morton, who had been shadowing Cole's movements, picked up a lead almost immediately. His phone records showed appointments linked to a small private notary office on the edge of town. The name listed for the booking was Redding Trust Advisory. A name too close to his old identity to be coincidence. Lila and I both knew that no man hiding nothing would need a side office with that kind of alias. At the same time, Renee arranged her own quiet surveillance. She booked a legitimate consultation at the notary next door and made sure there were cameras legally installed to catch whoever came in and out. The next move confirmed everything. Sarah told me that Cole had suggested she bring her trust fund documents so he could help organize wedding finances. He painted it as a gesture of transparency, a way to show they had nothing to hide. But the timing was precise, and the request was deliberate. I didn't need to hear more. Transparency is never about handing over control. Transparency is about sharing the truth in the open. And here was Cole, asking my daughter to surrender her independence before she had even walked down the aisle. I knew the time had come to move from suspicion to confrontation. With Sarah still torn between love and loyalty, I needed Cole to expose himself in a way no one could deny. Renee drafted a document we called the Safety Pledge, a financial agreement framed as a loving gesture, but containing a hidden clause. If Cole pressured Sarah to hand over control of her assets before the wedding, that clause would trigger immediate legal action. To him, it would look like a harmless piece of paper. To us, it was a trap. The FBI, led by Agent Aaron Blake, wired my dining room with discreet recorders. Every word, every hesitation, would be captured legally. Sarah agreed to host Cole for dinner. With me there as the reconciled mother, I greeted him warmly, masking every ounce of fury, and invited him to review the safety pledge. He smiled, all false humility, and spoke again of protecting Sarah. He said that trust required sacrifice, that love meant never questioning motives. But as he read the document, his mask cracked. He mentioned how a joint account would streamline Sarah's future and how a power of attorney would protect her if anything happened on the honeymoon. The words sounded gentle, but the implication was sharp enough to cut through any pretense. That was when I pushed the second hook across the table. A small USB drive, loaded with a video of a young woman from Arizona who had lost everything days before her own wedding when Cole disappeared. I told him I had spoken to her. His eyes darkened, and for the first time he dropped the polished smile. He leaned closer, his voice low, and muttered that things would be simpler if I stayed out of the wedding altogether. It was not a threat, shouted in anger. It was delivered like a fact. A plan already in place. Then came the switch. I handed him the stack of papers he had been so eager for Sarah to sign. He smirked. Certain he had won, and murmured that she had already signed enough for him to take care of her. That was the moment Sarah walked in from the kitchen with Agent Blake at her side. Her voice was calm but cold. She told Cole no one had signed anything. The documents were props, sealed and stamped by Renee herself. Cameras had been recording every word. Cole straightened in his chair, trying to laugh it off. But the room had already shifted. His confidence was no longer power. It was evidence. Cole sat frozen, his smirk slipping into silence. That was when Lila Morton entered the room carrying a binder so heavy it looked like it belonged in a courtroom. She laid it on the table and opened it to neat columns of transactions. Each page showed money routed through so-called philanthropic accounts, then funneled into 3 shell companies registered in Delaware. The dates matched the engagements Cole had pursued across different states. Every dollar was accounted for. Every trail connected to him. Agent Aaron Blake spoke with quiet authority. A warrant had already been executed for Cole's apartment. Inside, they had found multiple identification cards, each under a different name, and draft contracts identical to the one he had pressed Sarah to sign. There was no room left for doubt. Cole tried one last defense, claiming everything was a misunderstanding. He said the aliases were part of past business ventures, that the women had been willing partners. That paperwork was simply misunderstood. But his bravado began to falter when Maggie asked the question she had been saving. Why had he taken a photo of the marital agreement she presented at lunch and sent it within minutes to an address labeled Redding Trust Advisory? The name alone pierced through his rehearsed calm. He stammered, reaching for another excuse. But Aaron slid a document across the table. It was a cell tower log, showing that the message had been sent to a prepaid phone linked directly to a cryptocurrency account Cole had been using to move funds. The chain of evidence was complete. And for the first time that night, he looked trapped. When the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he turned to Sarah as though she might still defend him. But she did not flinch. Instead, she unfolded the safety pledge Renee had prepared and read aloud the clause that warned against coercion. Her voice was steady when she told him she never needed a man who claimed to protect her by stealing her choices. Cole was escorted out the door, his charm stripped away in the presence of proof. There was no crowd to applaud him, no audience to believe his lies. Only the weight of facts and the strength of the women he had underestimated. For Sarah, the night marked the moment she reclaimed her independence. For Maggie, it was the end of 7 years of shadows. Together, mother and daughter stood in a quiet house, not celebrating but breathing freely, knowing the mask had finally come off. In the weeks that followed, the evidence against Cole Harrington, once known as Mark Redding, grew too strong for even his smoothest words to escape. Federal prosecutors tied him to a string of financial frauds, and women across 3 states stepped forward to tell their stories. His shell companies were dissolved, his assets frozen, and his carefully crafted image of a redeemed philanthropist was gone forever. For once, justice didn't just close in, it locked tight. But endings are never just about the villain. They are about the people who survive him. Sarah returned to her work with a sharper eye and a stronger spine. She began speaking openly about financial red flags, even publishing a guide through her design studio's outreach program to help women protect themselves before marriage. Renee Porter developed those marital agreements into templates anyone could access, ensuring that what almost happened to Sarah could help prevent another tragedy. Lila Morton continued her investigations. Now under contract with Sarah's firm, I'm screening potential investors and donors before they could ever step foot in her studio. Her quiet vigilance became part of the family's shield. As for me, I started offering financial counseling for widows and divorced women. The very group Cole had preyed on. It was not just about numbers. It was about giving them back the confidence to trust their judgment again. The lesson was clear. Real love does not fear scrutiny. Any partner who tells you not to ask questions is asking you to live blind. Families may argue, but only a predator demands that you cut them away completely. In the end, it wasn't rage or revenge that defeated Cole Harrington. It was truth, patience, and the refusal to be silenced. ChatGPT said, "Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If it resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Share in the comments where you're watching from and what red flags you've seen in love or money. Your experience might help protect someone else."